მონაცემებში წერია. კერძოდ სექტემბერში მარცვლეულის რუსმა მიმწოდებლებმა ევროკავშირის ქვეყნებში მხოლოდ 21,000 ევროს ღირებულების პროდუქცია შეიტანეს. თუმცა ევროპის ქვეყნები აქტიურად იმარაგებდნენ რუსულ მარცვლეულს 1 ივლისამდე, როცა ევროკავშირში რუსეთიდან და ბელარუსიდან მარცვლეულის ზეთოვანი კულტურებისა და გადამამუშავებელი ზეთოვანი პროდუქტების იმპორტზე გაზრდილი გადასახადები ამოქმედდა. კერძოდ ივნისში ევროპაში რუსული მარცვლეულის იმპორტი თითქმის გაორმაგდა და ღირებულება 6,5 მილიონი ევროდან 11,8 მილიონ ევრომდე გაიზარდა. ივლისში ევროპის ქვეყნებში 2,9 მილიონი ევროს, ხოლო აგვისტოში 3,7 მილიონი ევროს რუსული მარცვლეული შევიდა. ცნობისთვის ევროკავშირში რუსულ და ბელარუსულ მარცვლეულზე ტონაზე 95 ევროს ოდენობის საიმპორტო გადასახადი, ხოლო ზეთოვან კულტურებსა და მათ გადამამუშავებელ პროდუქტებზე 50%-იანი გადასახადი მოქმედებს. ტარიფები ვრცელდება მარცვლეულზე, რომელიც ევროკავშირის 27 წევრ ქვეყანაში გამოსაყენებლად არის განკუთვნილი, ხოლო ბლოკის გავლით სხვა ქვეყნებში მარცვლეულის ტრანზიტს არ შეეხება. ამერიკის პრეზიდენტი ჯო ბაიდენი საპრეზიდენტო ვადის ამოწურვამდე მსოფლიო ბანკის განვითარების საერთაშორისო ასოციაციის უღარიბესი ქვეყნების დასახმარებლად რეკორდულ 4 მილიარდს გამოუყოფს. აღნიშნული შესახებ სააგენტო როიტერსი წერს. ბაიდენის ადმინისტრაციის მაღალი თანამდებობის პირის ინფორმაციით აღნიშნული შესახებ დათქმა ჯო ბაიდენმა რიო-დე-ჟანეიროში მიმდინარე დიდი ოცეულის სამიტის დახურულ შეხვედრაზე გააკეთა. ბოლოს ვაშინგტონის მიერ მსოფლიო ბანკის განვითარების საერთაშორისო ასოციაციისთვის გამოყოფილი დახმარების მოცულობა 2021 წლის დეკემბერში 3,5 მილიარდით განისაზღვრა. საინტერესოა, რამდენად მოიყვანს სისრულეში დონალდ ტრამპი ჯო ბაიდენის პირობას, როგორც ცნობილია, ტრამპის საგარეო დახმარების მაქსიმალურად შემცირებას გეგმავს. ამ მიზნით მან ილონ მასკთან ერთად მთავრობის ეფექტიანობის დეპარტამენტიც კი შექმნა, რომელსაც სწორედ მსოფლიოს უმდიდრესი ადამიანი უხელმძღვანელებს. ჯო ბაიდენის მიერ მსოფლიო ბანკის 4 მილიარდით დაფინანსებასთან დაკავშირებით დადებულ პირობაზე ჯერჯერობით კომენტარი არ გაუკეთებიათ ტრამპის მთავრობის გადაბარების გუნდის წევრებს. პოლიტიკის მკვლევრების ნაწილი ვარაუდობს, რომ ბაიდენის აღნიშნული გადაწყვეტილება მიზანმიმართული ნაბიჯია, რათა ხელისუფლების ჩაბარების შემდეგ დონალდ ტრამპს არაპოპულარული გადაწყვეტილებების მიღება მოუწიოს და ახალი პრეზიდენტის რეიტინგი შემცირდეს. ინდოელი მილიარდერი გაუტამ ადანისი კომპანიების შეფასება 27 მილიარდით დაეცა. როგორც ცნობილი ხდება, მის მფლობელობაში არსებული ჰოლდინგის ადანი გრუპის წინააღმდეგ ამერიკის შეერთებული შტატების პროკურატურამ სასამართლოში სარჩელი შეიტანა, რომელიც ბიზნესმენს და მის კომპანიას თაღლითობასა და მოწყიდვაში ადანაშაულებს. სასამართლოში საქმის აღძვრის სიახლე ინვესტორებმა იმდენად უარყოფითად მიიღეს, რომ ამბის გავრცელებიდან რამდენიმე საათში ადანი გრუპში შემავალი კომპანიების ჯამური შეფასება 27 მილიარდი დოლარით შემცირდა, რაც ჰოლდინგის არსებობის ისტორიაში დაფიქსირებული ყველაზე ცუდი შედეგია. უნდა აღინიშნოს, რომ ეს პირველი შემთხვევა არ არის, როცა ინდოელ ბიზნესმენს თაღლითობაში ადანაშაულებენ. მანამდე 2023 წელს Forbes-ის რეიტინგში ის მეორე ადგილს იკავებდა, თუმცა მოგვიანებით მისი ქონების შეფასება 80 მილიარდი დოლარით შემცირდა. ამ ყველაფრის მიზეზი ის იყო, რომ აქტივის ინვესტორთა ჯგუფმა Hindenburg Research-მა ვრცელი ანგარიში გამოაქვეყნა იმასთან დაკავშირებით, რომ ადანის ბიზნეს იმპერია სიცრუესა და კორუფციაზე იდგა, რასაც ადანი გრუპის კაპიტალიზაციის შემცირება მოჰყვა. ზოგადად Hindenburg-ის ძირითადი დანიშნულება კორპორაციული თაღლითობის გამოვლენაა, როგორც ირკვევა ადანის წინააღმდეგ დადებული ფსონით Hindenburg-მა 4 მილიონი დოლარის ფინანსური სარგებელი მიიღო. ამერიკულმა საინვესტიციო კომპანია Blackstone-მა შესაძლოა მალე გამოაცხადოს სწრაფი კვების ობიექტის ქსელის Jersey Mike's საბსის შესყიდვა. ინფორმაციას Wall Street Journal ინფორმირებულ წყაროებზე დაყრდნობით წერს. მათი თქმით, ტრანზაქციის თანხა კომპანიის დავალიანების გათვალისწინებით შეიძლება იყოს დაახლოებით 8 მილიარდი დოლარი. გამოცემის ცნობით გარიგება ჯდება Blackstone-ის სტრატეგიაში, რომელსაც აქვს ფრანჩაიზის მოდელზე მომუშავე ბიზნესებში ინვესტირების დიდი გამოცდილება. კერძოდ Hilton Hotels-ის შეძენა ითვლება ისტორიაში ყველაზე წარმატებულ ინვესტიციად უძრავი ქონების სექტორში. Jersey Mike's არის სიდიდით მეორე სენდვიჩების ქსელი შეერთებულ შტატებში. ამ სეგმენტში ის მხოლოდ Subway-ის ჩამორჩება და 3,000-ზე მეტი დაწესებულება აქვს. Amazon-ის დამფუძნებელმა Jeff Bezos-მა ამერიკის შეერთებულ შტატებში უსახლკაროების დასახმარებლად დამატებით 109 მილიონი გაიღო. შემოწირულობა ჯამში 40 არაკომერციულ ორგანიზაციას Bezos-ის ფონდის Day One Families Fund-ის მეშვეობით გადაეცემა. Bezos-ის ქველმოქმედების ფარგლებში ორგანიზაციები 425,000-დან 5 მილიონამდე დაფინანსებას მიიღებენ. უმსხვილეს ბენეფიციარებს შორის არიან Welcome House-ი და Genesis Center-ი. თითოეული მათგანი გაღებული თანხიდან 2,5 მილიონს მიიღებენ. Bezos-ის Day One Fund-მა 2018 წელს უსახლკარო ოჯახების დასახმარებლად 2 მილიარდის უზრუნველყოფის პირობა დადო. საქველმოქმედო ფონდს ამ დროისთვის 749 მილიონი აქვს გაცემული. უახლესი შემოწირულობის წყალობით Bezos-ის მიერ მთელი ცხოვრების განმავლობაში ქველმოქმედებისთვის გაღებული თანხა 3,5 მილიარდს აღწევს. ეს თანხა დაახლოებით იმდენია, რამდენიც Bezos-მა მხოლოდ ამ თვეში Amazon-ის აქციების ნაწილის გაყიდვიდან მიიღო. National Alliance to End Homelessness-ის მონაცემებით ამერიკაში უსახლკაროთა რაოდენობა წინა წელთან შედარებით 12%-ით გაიზარდა. ეს ყველაზე დიდი მატებაა მას შემდეგ, რაც 2007 წელს ორგანიზაციამ მონაცემების შეგროვება დაიწყო. ამერიკული Forbes-ი Amazon-ის დამფუძნებლის Jeff Bezos-ის ქონებას 218,8 მილიარდად აფასებს. Bezos-ი ამ დროისთვის მსოფლიოს მესამე უმდიდრესი ადამიანია. იაგუარი თავის საკულტო ლოგოს ცვლის, ბრენდმა ახალი ლოგო ოფიციალურ გვერდზე უკვე გამოაქვეყნა და აღნიშნა, რომ იაგუარისთვის ახალი ერა იწყება. ძვირადღირებულმა ავტომწარმოებელმა ახალ ლოგოზე დიდი ასოებით გამოსახა ბრენდის დასახელება. იაგუარი ცდილობს ბაზარზე გაიმყაროს პოზიცია, როგორც ელექტრომანქანების მწარმოებელმა. რებრენდინგის კვალდაკვალ პირველი ელექტრომობილის წარმოება 2026 წელს იგეგმება. ამერიკული ავტომწარმოებელი Ford-ი 2027 წლის ბოლომდე ევროპაში დაახლოებით 4000 თანამშრომლის დათხოვნას გეგმავს. როგორც კომპანიის პრეს-რელიზშია ნათქვამი, დაგეგმილი ღონისძიებები გავლენას მოახდენს დაახლოებით 2,9000 სამუშაო ადგილზე გერმანიაში. გარდა ამისა, კომპანია აპირებს კიოლნის ქარხანაში ექსპლორერისა და კაპრის ბრენდების ელექტრომობილების წარმოების შემცირებას. Ford-ი ევროპაში მთავარ პრობლემებად ელექტრომობილების ბაზრის მოსალოდნელზე ნელა განვითარებას და ჩინურ ბრენდებთან მძაფრ კონკურენციას მიიჩნევს. შედეგად ევროპის ავტომობილების მწარმოებელთა ასოციაციის მონაცემებით, კომპანიის წილი ევროპის ავტომობილების ბაზარზე წინა წლის ანალოგიურ პერიოდთან შედარებით 4,1%-დან 3,3%-მდე დაეცა. დუბაიში საერთაშორისო აეროპორტის მახლობლად ქალაქის პირველი საჰაერო ტაქსის ვერტი პორტის მშენებლობა დაიწყო. ამის შესახებ არაბეთის გაერთიანებული საამიროების პრემიერ-მინისტრის მოადგილემ განაცხადა. ახალი ობიექტი 3,100 კვადრატულ მეტრ ფართობზე იქნება გადაჭიმული, რომელიც წლის განმავლობაში 42,000 დაფრენას და 170,000 მგზავრს მიიღებს. სადგურები პირველად DXB-ს მახლობლად დუბაის მარინასა და პალმ-ჯუმეირას რეგიონებში გამოჩნდება, ხოლო საჰაერო ტაქსის გაშვება 2026 წელს იგეგმება. ხელისუფლება ხაზს უსვამს, რომ ინიციატივა მიზნად ისახავს დუბაი გახდეს პირველი ქალაქი მსოფლიოში, რომელიც მსურველებს თავაზობს ურბანულ საჰაერო ტრანსპორტს. მოსალოდნელია, რომ ახალი სერვისი 10-12 წუთამდე შეამცირებს საერთაშორისო აეროპორტიდან პალმ-ჯუმეირამდე მგზავრობის დროს. საჰაერო ტაქსის მაქსიმალური სიჩქარე 321 კმ/სთ-ია. ის განკუთვნილია 4 მგზავრისა და პილოტისთვის და საგრძნობლად ნაკლებ ხმაურს გამოიმუშავებს ტრადიციულ ვერტმფრენებთან შედარებით. კედელზე წებოვანი ლენტით მიკრული ბანანი სოტბის აუქციონზე 6,2 მილიონად გაიყიდა. იტალიელი მაურიციო კატელანის პროვოკაციული ნამუშევარი ჩინური წარმოშობის კრიპტოვალუტის სფეროში მოღვაწე ბიზნესმენმა ჯასტინ სანაიამ შეიძინა, რომლის თქმითაც კომპოზიცია არ არის მხოლოდ ხელოვნების ნიმუში, ის წარმოადგენს კულტურულ ფენომენს, რომელიც ხელოვნების მიმებისა და კრიპტოვალუტის სამყაროებს ერთმანეთთან აკავშირებს. მიხარია გაცნობოთ, რომ მე ვიყიდე ბანანი, ეს არ არის მხოლოდ ხელოვნების ნიმუში, ეს კულტურული ფენომენია, რომელიც აერთიანებს ხელოვნების სამყაროს, მიმებისა და კრიპტოვალუტის საზოგადოებებს. ჩემთვის დიდი პატივია ვიყო ამ ბანანის ამაყი მფლობელი. უახლოეს დღეებში მე ვაპირებ შევჭამო ბანანი, დაწერა სანმა. ეს არის მაურიციო კატელანის სამხატვრო კონცეფცია. მან წარმატებით გაყიდა თავისი ორი ნამუშევარი სერიიდან კედელზე მიკრული ბანანი. მათი ღირებულება $100,000-დან $150,000-მდე მერყეობდა, რაც შეეხება მესამე ანალოგიურ ნამუშევარს, ის ქართული წარმოშობის მხატვარმა დევიდ დათუნამ 2019 წელს შეჭამა. მისი თქმით, ამით მას უნდოდა ეჩვენებინა, რომ ასეთი პროექტები საღაზრსაა მოკლებული და არ შეიძლება ბანანი ასეთ ფასად იყიდებოდეს.
ჩვენ საქართველოდან ვართ. ეს BMG-ია. The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma. In 10 months of 2024, Georgia's exports to the EU amounted to $456 million, which is $155 million or 25% less than the same period in 2023. Share of the EU in Georgia's total exports is now below 10%, amounting to 8.4%. Geostat published a new report summarizing 10 months of 2024 external trade. According to Geostat, exports and re-exports from Georgia have surpassed $5.5 billion, which is 7.4% more compared to the last year. The main export market for Georgia is Kyrgyzstan, amounting to $1.05 billion. Exports have grown by 86%. The top exporting countries in 10 months of 24 for Georgia are Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Russian Federation, Armenia, Turkey, China, USA, Uzbekistan, Bulgaria. A tender has been issued to purchase 97 metro wagons as part of the city metro wagon renewal project. The project, which aims to modernize Tbilisi's metro system, will be co-financed by the Georgian government and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The first batch of the new wagons is expected to arrive by the end of 2026. The project will span 7 years to gradually deliver 22 new trains by 2030, including 13 4-carriage units and 9 5-carriage units. The total procurement budget for the project is approximately 200 million euros. Tbilisi City Hall has submitted the initial draft budget 2025 to the City Council. According to the initial draft budget, the expenses of Tbilisi City Hall are planned at 1,781,000,000 Georgian lari, which is 241 million less than compared to the budget of 2024. Despite the reduction in the overall budget of the City Hall, the salaries of employees are increasing to 145 million Georgian lari, which is 14 million increase compared to 2024. Acting Governor of the MBG, Natia Turnava, amended the document on the risk exposure concentration and large risk management. According to the updated version, Georgia's systemic bank is limited to granting a loan to the systemic bank of a foreign country exceeding 15% of the supervisory capital of a Georgian systemic bank. This is the checkpoints.
This is the Checkpoints. I'm Utiashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to sum up business and economics week for you. Fitch Ratings will summarize for you its decision behind granting Georgia BB rating and changing the outlook from positive to stable. The Checkpoints interviewed Arvind Ramakrishnan, Director of Sovereigns and Supranationals at Fitch Ratings, for more insights and in-depth analysis of Georgia's rating sensitivities. Mr. Ramakrishnan, thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking my questions. So what has changed in Georgia's credit rating since our last interview when we discussed the credit rating for Georgia?
Well, firstly, in June of this year, we revised the outlook on Georgia's BB credit rating from positive to stable. And the key driver for that was an increase in political risk and political polarization, which in itself was causing a lot of uncertainty and concerns potentially over perception of institutional independence in Georgia. And we believed at that time, and we think that that has been borne out as a result of these elections, that polarization, both politically and societally in Georgia, remains quite remains quite deep, and we don't expect that is going to go away in the near future, which could potentially complicate the consensus which may be required to undertake key reforms such as over management of state-owned enterprises and managing like central perceptions of central bank independence, for instance.
How does this uncertainty affect directly credit outlook for Georgia? Is it only through the reforms that might be halted, or are there any other factors that are also there?
Well, we have been watching the key economic indicators for Georgia quite closely, and I have to say that that a direct cause and effect does not appear to be evident in the key economic metrics. So, for instance, economic growth continues to remain quite strong. It's according to flash estimates, growth has been close to 10% in the first 9 months of this year, which means that there is upside to our current growth projection of 7% of this year for Georgia. The lari has been reasonably stable, but we must not. But we have to consider also the intervention that the central bank has made ahead of the elections, in particular, in potentially to assuage investor confidence and preempt any volatility or nervousness on the part of investors. We haven't seen any evidence that there is like negative investor sentiment, which can be seen through, for instance, foreign direct investment or even anecdotally in the form of investors planning to pull out of Georgia or postponing their scheduled big investments in Georgia at this time.
Let us move to the NBG side of the picture in just one moment. But lastly, about the elections, does the credit rating also weigh in the political side of these elections, whether they are finally assessed as free and fair, and does this political side of these elections also have impact on credit rating for Georgia?
Well, when we look at sovereign credit ratings, we look at a very important component of that is governance indicators. And that, of course, includes factors such as the structure of institutions, the independence of institutions, and where we have democratic institutions and processes like elections, how freely, fairly, and transparently they are conducted. So in this case for Georgia, we are aware that organizations like the OSCE, for example, have raised some concerns over the full fairness of the elections. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we see that a not insubstantial part of the population appears dissatisfied with the result. And we'll be watching to see how the government deals with that, and whether in case of any judicial or legal challenges to the election results that, as we are seeing currently making its way to the courts, how are they dealt with from an institutional perspective? So there is no doubt that all these developments will be reflected in the quality of governance as it is perceived for Georgia. But we believe that the results of this will only become evident over time.
Yes, and this is in this context that you mention in the report the World Bank governance indicators, and this is one of the key studies that you will be incorporating into the credit rating, right?
Yes, indeed. And I think it is worth mentioning that Georgia actually currently does better than most of its rating peers on the governance indicators, which in itself is a sign of the progress that Georgia has made over the last decade or so over various metrics, particularly ease of doing business, for example, and control of corruption and all these factors. But of course, I mean, going forward, the trajectory will be watched much more closely given the developments that we had, such as the passage of the so-called transparency law earlier this year, which was also controversial and met with opposition from many parts of society. And now the elections, which have also produced a lot of scrutiny or generated a lot of scrutiny.
When you say its peers, do you mainly consider the region against the countries within the region, or more globally?
Well, in general, when we say peers in the context of like sovereign credit ratings, we are talking about rating peers. So since Georgia's credit rating is BB, we are talking about peers which have a rating of BB, BB plus, or BB minus. And in that, Georgia is a clear outlier. It performs much better. But even if you look at it within the region, within the Caucasus region, for instance, Georgia's governance indicators do stand out compared to other countries in the region.
Since we mentioned peers, BB peers of Georgia, in this report you mentioned that Georgia's reserves are now lower than the levels of the BB peers. What does this emphasis mean more specifically, Mr. Ramakrishnan?
Yeah, well, Georgia's external balance sheet is a rating weakness compared to its rating peers. And if you look at the FX reserves, which we highlighted in our latest publication, so as of the end of September, they stand at only about 2.6 months of current account payments, which is below the bare minimum of 3 months that the IMF recommends, and below the reserve adequacy metrics. So that is something that we view as a rating weakness for Georgia, and in fact, it does weigh on our credit assessment of Georgia. And in our opinion, if Georgia is able to actually run smaller current account deficits with the potential that it is able to build up its FX reserves over time and also attract more foreign investments, then that could potentially lead to upside for the rating. However, this is likely to take time given the structure of Georgia's economy.
Let us explain a little bit why that is important and how that affects the country overall and the rating overall. Why are you looking at the external buffers of the country?
Well, the external balance sheet of a country is one of the important pillars of any sovereign credit rating. So at Fitch, we consider a sovereign rating broadly in 4 pillars. So one is the macroeconomic policies and prospects. The other is public finances. The other is structural, which talks about like factors like the governance and the income levels of a country, for example. And then finally, we have external finances. Obviously, a country needs to have relatively stable external finances and external cushions in order to be able to pay for its imports, for instance, and in order to be able to meet its external debt payment obligations and so on. So within these factors, Georgia underperforms its rating peers, as I have mentioned, and that is largely a function of structural current account deficits over the years. Which has resulted in an external credit, debtor position.
What is the logic behind spending these reserves at this point in time? Because the last spendings, they are quite high. They're like records in volume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, Georgia. Initially, like the central bank, the National Bank of Georgia says that it is committed to a floating exchange rate regime, but that it will intervene in the event of like extreme market volatility in order to restore confidence. So far, we have seen 2 big bouts of intervention. So one was in the aftermath of the passage of the transparency law back in May, when the central bank cumulatively sold close to $109 million in order to prop up the currency. And at that time, it seemed clear to us that this was a move undertaken by the central bank to shore up confidence in the lari. And ultimately, a weak lari can have negative implications for a number of credit metrics for Georgia, given that more than 70% of central government debt is denominated in foreign currency. And this time, ahead of the elections, in the week leading up to the elections, we saw the NBG sell up to $100 million out of its foreign exchange reserves in order to purchase lari. And this might have been a move to preempt any volatility resulting from the election results. I don't want to comment specifically on whether these policies are good or bad. All I will say is that in general, when a country has a floating exchange rate regime, we consider that flexibility as important in the external in the assessment of external finances from the perspective of also having an adequate FX reserve cushion. And Georgia's FX reserve position, as I've already mentioned, is already below its rating peers. So that is something to watch closely.
Yes, you mentioned elections and the volatilities after the elections, but given the specifics of these elections that we are finding from different investigative reports and the questions raised by OC, do you think that could be like the balancing factor for, I don't know how to call it, but some kind of like a shadow money that might be circulating during elections, like paying bribes and like bringing that sort of cash on the market as well?
I'm afraid I will not be able to comment on that.
Okay. Also, how do you think during this time period, how would you assess using like B-Match platform by the NBG? Because we only see after a month how much actually the NBG has sold on the market, while during the open auctions we see how much is spent, like more or less in the real time, right? So do you think that is a good practice in this overall situation, to be relying more on BMET platform?
I wouldn't want to comment on the use of a particular platform, but in general, greater transparency by central banks and indeed by the key economic institutions of a sovereign is viewed more positively by us in general. The quality of the data and the transparency with which it is made available. So all I would say is that like offering greater transparency would bode well in these kinds of circumstances.
Yes, my question stems from one of the focuses that you have in the report, and that goes back to the IMF standby program being suspended for Georgia at this time. What factor does this remain for Georgia's sovereign credit rating?
Well, the IMF program, as you know, it has been suspended for over a year now. What we see the IMF standby program as providing Georgia is primarily credibility, because this program was precautionary anyway, and we don't believe that Georgia had an intention to draw down on this program, unlike some other countries. But what it did provide Georgia with was a stamp of approval, if you like, for the standard of its decision making and of its policies. Now, that said, the fact that the program has been suspended, we have not seen signs of distress within the economy, as I have mentioned. So yes, reserve levels are low, below what the IMF recommends, and compared to some of the other countries in the same rating category. But we don't see imminent risk of a crisis. So, for example, we haven't seen evidence that there is substantial capital outflow, for instance, something like the thousands of Ukrainians and Russians who have come in, taking all the capital and moving out of the country or overseas, which in itself could precipitate a run on the lari. So we haven't seen evidence of that. And so at this moment in time, we would say that further downside risks specifically to the rating from the continued suspension of the IMF program are probably limited.
Yes, Vice Governor Ekaterina Mikhabadze of the Central Bank of Georgia, she stated, and that's her quote, that today we have ideal coincidence of low inflation and high economic growth. How sustainable is that picture for Georgia, Mr. Ramakrishnan, and how do you weigh in this sustainability in the credit rating?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I would say that in terms of growth prospects, as I mentioned, like we currently expect 7% growth this year, which is quite strong after 2 years of continued strong growth. And there seems to be upside to it based on the performance of the economy in the first 3 quarters of the year. So we expect growth up at about 5% over the next couple of years, and potential growth averaging to about 4.5%. Now, the inflation has continued to be very low. So the latest print we have for October is just 0.3% year on year, which does seem surprising when you have like such strong economic growth with all the potential for overheating. But we should remember that, like, there are base factors that also base effects that also come into play. And the lari has also been relatively stable. And that is, of course, is important for the inflation basket in Georgia. Going forward, we do think that inflation will increase because it cannot be at these very low levels for a very prolonged time, particularly as the growth impulse is relatively strong. But yeah, I mean, again, we are set to produce our next review of Georgia in the first week of December. And before then, all I would say is that, I mean, so far the economy appears to be doing relatively well, and there are no obvious sources of instability within the economy.
One more thing I would like to check with you, Mr. Arvind. Recently Global Finance magazine graded some central bankers. It also graded Natia Turnava with the lowest grade. It was a D grade, and this D grade was explained among many other things, also because of the the questions that that exist about the independence of the central bank. Are these kinds of assessments important for credit agencies?
Independence of central banks and the credibility of monetary policy making, the ability with which they can respond to shocks and they can take action to in the event of any instability in the economy is absolutely important when we consider the structural elements of an economy. And in this, actually, Georgia has been outperforming its peers, at least in recent years. Now, we all know the concerns that the IMF has had over the changes to the appointment system within the central bank, which has been a direct trigger for the suspension of the standby agreement. Now, if we observe evidence that any ongoing developments at the central bank have the potential to undermine policy making, then we will reflect that in our analysis. But to answer your question, in short, yes, the independence, quality and credibility of institutions like the central bank are, of course, important for our assessment of sovereign credit risk.
I know that you are always very cautious when talking about commercial banking sector in Georgia. I noted that in our last interview. You mentioned in the report that regulatory developments on the implementation of sanctions have also increased uncertainty for Georgian banks. What do you mean exactly? Are these like the old circumstances that we all know, like sanctions, international sanctions regime, and also the MBG's law that was one of the reasons why the IMF standby programs was suspended for Georgia? Are these only the factors at this moment that may be considered as main risks for the Georgian banks, or do you see some other factors as well, maybe related to some new developments and even elections?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to, so I will limit my comments on the banking sector to the potential impact from sanctions. So firstly, we haven't observed any sign that the Georgian banking system, particularly the largest banks which are listed in the UK, so they do not, that we haven't seen any evidence that they do not intend to comply with Western sanctions, at least like voluntarily. So that has remained their stance since the sanctions were imposed on Russia, and we don't really expect that is going to change, given the very high exposure that they have to the Western, and the obvious risks and vulnerabilities that come with that. The regulatory uncertainty that we referred to were developments earlier this year where there was some confusion over requirements by the local authorities that, like, any Georgians who were subject to sanctions and who had accounts frozen first had to be convicted in a Georgian court of law before the bank in Georgia could take such an action against them. So but we understand that has later been resolved in some way. So the broad point is this, that I mean, when we have any lack of regulatory clarity from the regulators, from the national banking authorities, for instance, then that could be seen negatively by investors, and it could raise uncertainty.
Thank you so much. So, for example, Fitch ratings at this point in this sector does not touch upon the I don't know, the facts, like, for example, like some assets being frozen by the Georgian banks to the two researchers of the Atlantic Council without banks giving them the right explanation, and then financial police stating that this was the court order. I mean, this is not what you are looking at. You are still looking at the more like global picture from the international sanctions point of view.
Yes, I mean, without commenting on the specific cases that you mentioned, yes, I mean, like, what I was referring to is the clarity that the banks have with regard to the ability to comply with Western sanctions on Russia.
Yes, thank you for that clarity. And the last point, but very important point for Georgia, and thank you again for your time and for your answers. While the government is constitutionally bound to seek EU membership, Fitch expects delays in the resumption of EU negotiation talks, effectively suspended by the EU in July, and no meaningful progress towards NATO accession in the medium term. Why is that factor also for the credit ratings, Mr. Ramakrishnan?
Well, firstly, it should not be a surprise that we are not expecting any great progress with EU accession. I mean, that was the case even since the passage of the transparency legislation. And now after the election, again, like broadly speaking, the response of the EU has not been one which has been very cordial to Georgia. So it's been one of caution. So we expect that the rift in the relationship will take some time to heal. So we're not like looking at like very fast progress, certainly over EU accession. Now, why does this matter for the credit rating? I mean, all things equal, accession and membership of the EU is something that we view as positive because of the boost that generally tends to bring to governance, the regulatory oversight, the support from institutions, and also contributions, the budgetary contributions that you get from the EU as a member state. So if hypothetically Georgia were to become an EU member state, then it would be able to benefit from all of that, which over time, and we have seen this with many other EU countries which became members of the last 20 years or so, will provide upside to governance as well as to economic growth as well, because it reduces a lot of barriers to trade and investment and so on, which is why it matters for the credit rating.
Thank you so much. And my last question, it kind of like becomes a traditional question to summarize for our viewers and followers. What are the main credit sensitivities of Georgia at this point?
Yes, absolutely. No, it's a very relevant question indeed. So for the first thing that I will say is that so the credit rating of BB is on a stable outlook, which means that in our view, the balance of risks is pretty much stable. So the positives and the negatives are broadly balanced in our view. So what could cause some kind of negative rating action? So firstly, if there were a substantial worsening of domestic political or geopolitical risks, which had an impact on governance or on macroeconomic performance, then that could be negative for the rating. And it could be either as a result of this or independently of itself. If we saw the macroeconomic policy framework weaken, that could undermine the quality of policy making. That would also be negative for the rating. On the flip side, if we saw a sustained reduction in the external vulnerability, which is what I was referring to earlier, so if we did not see these chronic structural current account deficits, for instance, then that would be positive for external finances over time. That could provide upside to the rating. Implementation of reforms to the policy framework, that would improve the macro policy framework and provide upside to the rating. And but even though Georgia actually does well compared to most of its peers on factors like public debt and on many fiscal indicators, if we saw a reduction in, say, the FX proportion, the FX denominated proportion of public debt, because that is a vulnerability, then that could also, other things being equal, be positive for the rating.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arvind, for your time, and thank you so much for this very interesting interview. Before the interview, we didn't yet know that in October 2024, Georgia's foreign exchange reserves decreased by a record 627 million USD, according to the latest information released by the bank. The four foreign exchange interventions made immediately before the parliamentary elections mark a significant decline in the country's foreign exchange reserve, which fell from 4.7 billion to 408 billion. This is the largest one-month decline in the history of the National Bank of Georgia. The main reason for this decrease was the four foreign exchange interventions carried out by the NBG in the pre-election period, including the sale of $213 million and the implementation of additional interventions allegedly through the B-Match platform. The detailed statistics on the volume of reserves sold this way through the B-Match platform platform will be available on November 25th. Davit Utiashvili, head of the Financial Stability Department at the National Bank of Georgia, told analytics the currency market is under pressure due to pre-election activities, one-time transactions and expectations. According to Utiashvili, the NBG's intervention strategy involved deploying reserves to counteract temporary market imbalances. As experience shows, after the passing of the election agitation, the market players will return the currency purchased in excess, which will allow the National Bank to fill its reserves. Like similar periods in other countries, this is the pressure on the currency market related to the pre-election period and expectations. As experience shows, market players return the overbought foreign currency when the turbulent episode passes and negative expectations subside. Therefore, the National Bank of Georgia expects that they will refill the reserves in the coming months. Utiashvili added that the National Bank operates by the International Reserves Management Strategy, which is in line with the practice of other central banks. More on business from Natia Taktakishvili.
Shopping mall Galleria Tbilisi, founded by Bidina Ivanishvili's co-investment fund, has published its consolidated financial report for 2023. According to the profit and loss report, the total revenue of the shopping mall amounted to 40 million lari in 2023, which was 3.5 million lari more compared to 2022. As of the document, the group's net profit stood at 4.7 million lari in 2023. According to Galleria Holdings' 2023 consolidated financial statement, the shopping center's occupancy rate was 98%. Galleria Tbilisi includes the following facilities: shopping mall Galleria Tbilisi, Hotel Radius Tbilisi managed by LLC Galleria Hotel Management, Office 1 and Office 2. Bidina Ivanishvili's co-investment fund began construction of a 25,000 square meter multifunctional shopping mall in 2015. The total investment amounted to 97 million USD. Company Xavrebi is building a residential complex in Saguramo. The investment cost of the project is up to 30 million lari. The founder of the company, Davit, notes that the complex is fully planned for 120 residents. He declares that 40% of the complex is already sold. According to him, the interest in the project is mainly from locals. The company tries to sell residential houses at an affordable price in order to compete with the sales of apartments in the suburbs of Tbilisi. Mostly locals are interested in the project, but foreigners also want to buy the real estate in the complex. No matter how surprising it may be, there is a lot of interest from young people who consider the property near the capital city not for as a summer resident, but as a place to live. We developed the concept of the complex in such a way that the house can compete with apartments in the suburbs of Tbilisi. For example, a 3-bedroom house with a yard is available for 90,000 USD. By purchasing a house, the owner benefits from the infrastructure that is arranged in the complex, explained the founder of Xavrebi Group. Xavrebi Saguramo project is being built on 5 hectares, where high-class infrastructure will be arranged, including swimming pools, playgrounds, recreation areas, cafes and restaurants. The complex will be completed in a year and a half. The investment cost of the project is up to 30 million lari. Georgi Margvelashvili, founder of Tbilvino, declares that several years ago the company decided to focus on high-quality wine, which price would be above the average. According to him, the cost of their premium quality wine starts from 20 USD and goes up to 100 USD. Tbilvino presented a collection of premium concept wines early in October. The collection includes 8 types of wines: Zwane single vineyard, Saperavi twin vineyards, Quevris Kisi, Quevris Saperavi single vineyard, and Alexandrouli single vineyard. The premium line was created with the inspiration of Georgian endemic wine variety Saperavi and unique Quevri wines. Georgi Margvelashvili told BMWG that he had been working on the collection of Georgian premium wines for 4 years. We created premium wines with vision that these wines would bring recognition to Georgian grape varieties, especially Saperavi and Quevri wine, establish a worthy place in the top 10 exporting countries and fully realize the potential of Georgian wine as a whole, Georgi Margvelashvili noted. The premium wines of Tbilisi have left the homeland and company exports its products to the UK. These wines will soon appear in Korea, Canada and USA. Irma Kochantiraze, executive director of Georgian Traditional Swiss Chirchkhela, told BMDG that due to the current political situation in the country, their partners from Israel suspended negotiations on the export with the company and closed the project. The company started negotiations on exports to Israel early this year. The plan was to export 20 tons of dried fruits to Israel. However, due to the current political situation in the country, the Israel side refused to cooperate with the company. The tense political condition in Georgia directly affected our business. They told us that due to the situation in the country, they couldn't take our products at this stage. Our partners were very clear, noting that Israel is a country with a European vision. As a result, the project has been closed at this stage, says Kochantiraze. The company's CEO adds that Chirchkhela has small exports to Czech Republic, Austria, Germany and Dubai. The management of Chirchkhela refuses to sell the products in Russia. We had a number of offers from Russian organizations, but at the very beginning of the business, we refused this market. Even when we went to exhibitions, we had a sign at the table saying that 20% of our country is occupied by Russia, and we offered 20% discount to non-Russian customers, Irma Kochantiraze says. According to the company's CEO, grant projects are currently suspended, therefore they cannot participate in the competitions. Erekle Kokaya's CEO of Gudauri Inn declares that the hotel is expanding. According to the hotel's owner, Inn Group plans to open another hotel building for the new year. Construction of another building near Gudauri Inn will be completed by the new year. This will be a 3-story building which will include a spa center with its own pool, jacuzzis and a wellness area. After the completion of this block, the number of hotel rooms will increase by 30. At this stage, the investment exceeds 3 million lari. I really hope that this building will open by the new year and we will also receive vacationers. After the implementation of the project, we focused on offering additional services to the guests, as the demand from vacationers in this direction is also growing. Erekle Kokaya noted, adding that the Gudauri is mainly visited by foreign tourists. For example, I would single out Lithuanian vacationers during the winter season, while in summer we have more guests from Arab countries, Kokaya said. Company Tatarati, which produces Georgian traditional sweets and natural products, plans to expand next year. The co-founder of the company, Tinatin Uridia, said in an interview with BMDG. At this stage, Tatarati employs a total of 4 people and produces small quantities of products. However, according to Tinatin Uridia, in order to satisfy the local market and expand the sales area, the issue of expansion has been put on the agenda. We are planning to expand next year and increase the production at the same time. This will allow us to develop the sales area in the local market. We want to have our own enterprise and be able to sell products on larger scale. We don't have any ambitions for exports yet, but we still want to be represented with an increased share on the Georgian market. We are actively working on the issue and hope to have our own enterprise by the end of the next year. We don't know exact location. We are in the research process, but we think it will be either near Tbilisi or in Tbilisi, says Tinatin Uridia. Tatarati is a family business producing traditional Georgian sweets and natural products, which was founded in 2021 by the sisters Tamar and Tinatin Uridia. The small enterprise offers customers 5 types of fruit leather, chirchkhela, kozinaki, various types of tea, and Belgium chocolate with Georgian nuts. The company sells these products on the local market. Winery Ilia, located in the village of Mukhatgwerdim, Tsketa region, will export its products for the first time to China. The company's co-founder Levan Zhuania spoke about this in an interview with BMDG. We recently finished negotiations with a Chinese partner. We have the documents ready and we are waiting for them to take our wine to China. At the initial stage, they bought 204 bottles. As for the price, Chinese partners pay quite well, Zhuania noted, although he didn't specify justify the cost. As he stated, their winery has the potential to process more than 20 tons of grapes. However, at this stage, only 4 tons of grape is processed. Our wine has a 3-year shelf life. This price is within 200 lari and is sold at the stores of 8,000 vintages. We also sell it in our one of partner stores in Tsketa, said co-founder of the winery. According to him, in addition to the wine production under Ilya brand, the company also produces more budget line with it sold under the name Erti. Its price on the market ranges from 70 to 100 lari. The idea of establishing winery Ilya under the brand Tsketa Winery arose in 2017. As for future plans, according to Joania, it's planned to receive visitors to the winery and offer wine tasting services to the guests. The dairy products producing company Grand Pass Farm will complete the construction of a new enterprise by the end of the year. The company announced the project last year. Sopiko Tabatadze, co-founder of the family business, spoke to BMWG about the news and noted that the enterprise was built in line with modern standards. A new farm has already been built. Its equipment has been financed within the framework of the SQIL project. The total investment in the project is over 2 million lari. We have also increased the number of livestock and expect that productivity will increase significantly. Previously, we had 70 heads of livestock, but now we will have 200 heads of livestock. We expect that productivity will increase by 150%. In addition, we plan to add new products to the assortment, European cheese and dairy products. Tabatadze says it's worth noting that the products produced by the family business are sold online as well as through warehouse exhibitions. According to the founder of Grand Pass Farm, since the production is equipped with machinery, the farm does not require a large number of staff. In total, the enterprise employs about 15 people. The dairy company Grand Pass Farm has been actively operating on the market for 2 years. However, it has half a century of experience in the production of dairy products. It offers customers 3 types of cheese made from natural healthy milk obtained from the farm, such as Emiratian cheese, Suguni and mozzarella. The company also produces cottage cheese and naduri.
The consent of the German parliament is required for the opening of negotiations on joining the European Union. In the current situation, there is no chance for this to happen for Georgia. The German ambassador Peter Fischer published a corresponding statement on his own page of X. According to Fischer, a similar conclusion was made by Anton Hofreiter, chairman of the European Union Affairs Committee of the German Parliament Bundestag, after his visit to Georgia. Member of Parliament Anton Hofreiter, chairman of the Bundestag's European Union Affairs Committee, was in Tbilisi for 24 hours. Conclusion: Article 23 of the German Constitution and a specific law require the consent of the parliament to open accession negotiations. In the current situation, there is no chance for this to happen to Georgia, Fischer wrote. Georgian Parliament Speaker Shalva Papuashvili said that ambassadors are not invited to the first sitting of the 11th Convocation Parliament. I sent out invitations 2 days ago, but I did not invite the ambassadors. Members of the government and representatives of constitutional bodies will be attending. The ambassadors are not invited because it is an internal issue and we aim to minimize foreign influence. The involvement of ambassadors to or other countries in the process is not necessary. Georgians should acknowledge that this is the Parliament of Georgia and the newly elected MPs, government and constitutional bodies will be in attendance, he explained. The 11th Convocation Parliament of Georgia will hold its first sitting on November 25th. And that's all for today. We will meet next Sunday. Before that, follow us on BM.G.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.